I'm Areg and I'm 14 years old. My interests include abseiling, having fun with my AYF junior colleagues, and I dabble in bringing down despotic dictators over Twitter. I wake up excited on Thursday mornings as I head to my internship gig at the Armenian-National Committee of Australia's head office. I ride this scooter to the metro station and catch a bus to Camp Haitad. Yes, we have a bit of a way to travel, but I really wouldn't have it any other way. I want to follow in the footsteps of my dad and uncle, who are humble servants of the Armenian cause, like current leaders in Armenian advocacy. I really want to make a difference, and let's face it, the Armenian National Committee is the best way any of us can do that. Nobody spends most hours of each day fighting for causes that Armenian-Australians genuinely believe in, causes that I believe in, and I think you should too. ANC-AU advocates for the stories our ancestors died to preserve and actively rallies for justice. Australia is yet to recognise the Armenian genocide, but each day that I come in, I see our goals slowly becoming a reality. There is a plan, there is energy, there is progress. Like last December, when 7 Australian members of Parliament spoke in favour of a motion honouring the 70th anniversary of the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide. The motion was introduced in the Australian House of Representatives by government MP Tim Wilson. Did you know he's of Armenian ancestry? Anyway, Tim Wilson and 6 other MPs representing both major political parties used this motion as an opportunity to call on Australia, one of the first nations to ratify the Genocide Convention, to recognise the Armenian genocide. I was watching their speeches through Facebook on my phone and wasn't surprised to see the ANC team sitting behind the MPs in the gallery.
There is no ambiguity. I remain fundamentally disappointed that our national parliament doesn't fully acknowledge the horror and the tragedy of the genocide against the Armenians. And this motion today is about calling out that silence in this parliament and across everybody to make sure that these crimes never happen again.
Let me say in this House that I think the world has been too slow to recognise and call out the Armenian genocide a century ago for what it was. And it's time every nation in the world, including our own, recognised the Armenian genocide for what it was.
That we remember this genocide that happened on the First World War, and if we don't remember these kind of things, what it leads to are situations that we've seen to a lesser extent all around the world since, but in Darfur, Myanmar, Syria, North Korea, and now is happening in East Kazakhstan, in Xinjiang, in China.
The experience of the Armenians was one of the first, but unfortunately it wasn't the last. As others have mentioned, we still see the world remain silent while genocides are perpetrated. The Armenians to this day struggle against the efforts of a genocidal regime to eradicate their presence in their historic homeland. The Armenians of the Republic of Artsakh have, from the late 80s until today, been in a state of conflict. In Baku, many are subjected to racism, discrimination and marginalisation because of their heritage. This must stop.
Senator Christina Keneally also spoke the following day in the Federal Parliament's upper house, adding her powerful voice in support of a motion in June 2018 recognising Australia's first international humanitarian relief effort.
President, in calling on the Federal Parliament to acknowledge our first humanitarian effort as a country and to recognise the Armenian genocide.
Don't tell anyone, but I've always kind of liked Senator Keneally. When she stood in the Senate and called on Australia to recognise the Armenian genocide, my like became love. ask myself sometimes, why do you think these politicians, as nice as they are, focus on the genocide that took my great-grandparents' home and family? Because hatred. Because the Armenian National Committee of Australia meets with them, explains to them why this is important to Armenian Australians as descendants of survivors of the Armenian genocide. This is what I want to be a part of. Do you know what one of the most surreal moments for me was though? Watching a group of Australian federal and state politicians paying their respects at the Armenian Genocide Memorial in Yerevan, Armenia. How cool it was seeing Armenian media outlets plaster footage everywhere of our Aussie politicians, people I've seen on Q&A and Sky News, laying flowers at the eternal flame at the Dizden Agapet, touring the museum and planting a tree in the Garden of Remembrance. Of course the ANC was there, chaperoning these political leaders as they experience themselves the emotion that we all feel at the sacred site. I reckon these politicians would come back better informed, more sympathetic and better advocates for the importance of the Armenian genocide recognition by the Commonwealth of Australia. I remember so many will learn of our plight because of this trip, like when ANC jumps on the media. Do you remember when Alan Jones of 2GB interviewed ANC-AU's Executive Director Areg Grigorian? In fact, twice this year this happened. Twice! He's Australia's leading radio broadcaster. Did you know 20% of all Aussies listening to radio in the morning are listening to Alan Jones? Anyway, here was Alan Jones giving a 3-minute accurate historial on the Armenian genocide and asking our own Haig how Armenian Australians felt in light of comments made by Turkey's president threatening Australians and New Zealanders travelling to Gallipoli for Anzac Day commemorations.
The 24th of April is the anniversary of what's known as the Armenian Genocide. 104 years ago, on the eve of World War I, there were 2 million Armenians in the declining Ottoman Empire. By 1922, there were fewer than 400,000. The others, about 1.5 million, were killed in what's historically termed the Armenian Genocide, because on April 24, 1915, the Turkish government arrested and executed several hundred Armenian intellectuals. So when we remember Gallipoli on April 25 and we look at the comments by Erdogan today, we need to remember the millions who were killed in the Armenian genocide.
But we have been blocked in our attempts, not by members of parliament who are willing to vote on this issue, but by administrations because of the geopolitical ties and diplomatic relations with Turkey. I think these comments by Erdogan have lifted that diplomatic veil, and what our community has been trying to promote to the Australian government over many years is being observed now by a wider public.
Alan Jones was sympathetic, and on the second occasion he backed Armenian Australians for slamming a letter from Prime Minister Scott Morrison, who performed the backflip on his former righteous position on the Armenian genocide.
Now, Mr. Morrison has previously used the term genocide and said it was one of the greatest crimes against humanity, which it was. So the local Armenian community refused to read out Mr. Morrison's statement. The spokesman saying the backflip is downright offensive and equates the genocide to a car crash.
What made it very upsetting for us to receive this statement from Scott Morrison is in 2011, when he was in opposition, he actually made a speech in Parliament calling on Australia to recognise the Armenian genocide and called it a genocide, explained exactly what happened, just like you did earlier in your program today. So what we were expecting from him as Prime Minister is not something radical. We weren't trying to put words in his mouth. It was basically asking him to say what he believed.
Even the Sydney Morning Herald and the Age covered the ScoMo backflip, quoting ANC's Executive Director Areg Grigorian, who made it clear that for Armenian Australians it doesn't matter if you're a PM or a janitor. Your inconsistencies representing Armenian issues will be called out. All this media talk reminds me of me sitting in front of my TV after the March for Justice, trying to catch a glimpse of myself shouting "Shame on Turkey." I'm always so proud to march with my Armenian brothers and sisters every year. Before spending these Thursdays at the Armenian National Committee of Australia's head office, I used to think all this progress on Armenian genocide recognition must mean that this is pretty much all they work on. Not only is that not true, I've witnessed that more of their time goes into Artsakh and Armenia, as well as our community needs, than into the Armenian genocide. Haytad wants Artsakh's journey to achieve genuine peace and freedom recognised by the international community. I remember the speech Hayt made at the National Armenian Genocide Commemoration in Sydney, linking the genocide to Artsakh and publicly calling out the silence of Australia's bureaucrats.
With Artsakh, like the Armenian genocide, Australia has exercised the empty art of euphemism for truth, silence in place of recognition. It calls on peacemakers to lead the way, while it takes Azerbaijan's side where possible, with carefully crafted verbal linguistics, blinded by the opportunities that might come with their petrodollars. But all this means for humanity is more silence. Silence that breeds impunity for mass murder. Impunity that breeds more murder.
It wasn't long after that, after I saw ANC's words turn into action, with the highest level delegation from the Republic of Artsakh, led by Foreign Minister Mas Ismailian in Parliament House, Canberra. ANC had hosted a reception for a minister of a state that Australia does not yet formally recognise. Some of the highest political figures at the table were pledging their support for the Armenians of Artsakh. While Mr. Mailian was there, ANC-AU made a major announcement, the launch of the Australian Friends of Artsakh network, which is made up of over 40 prominent Australian supporters of the right to self-determination of the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh, including federal ministers and parliamentarians, a state premier and fellow state parliamentarians, a mayor, councillors, academics, thought leaders and heads of religious and community institutions. It's massive to see politicians like Paul Fletcher, Gladys Berejiklian, Christina Keneally, Erica Betts, Richard Di Natale, Hugh McDermott, Jonathan O'Day, Walt Secord, alongside academics like Professor Peter Stanley and Dr. Sevos Dowski, alongside religious leaders like the Anglican Archbishop of Sydney, all in a network declaring support for Artsakh. You know what my favourite Artsakh moment was this year? Seeing my local member for Benelong, John Alexander, making history as the first federal Australian parliamentarian to visit Artsakh. I wish I was there to see that with my own eyes. I know John Alexander will be the first, but he won't be the last. I'm sure of it, so I'll be there next time. What do you think? Will Haig let me? State MP Hugh McDermott visited with John, and he said in his speech he can't wait to get on Azerbaijan's blacklist. Did you know how many MPs are on that persona non grata list of Azerbaijan's dictator Ilham Aliyev because of their earlier visits? Gladys Berejiklian is on there, Jonathan O'Day also, as is Walt Secord, Amanda Fazio, Fred Knight, Marie Fakaria, now add John Alexander and Hugh McDermott. Ridiculous! I can't wait until my name gets on that list. Not only is the ANC-AU all about standing up for Artsakh, but it's also all about standing up against Artsakh's aggressor, Azerbaijan. You know I've been doing the same against Aliyev on Twitter and he still hasn't blocked me. He's blocked others. What am I doing wrong? Anyway, thanks to ANC-AU's reminder of a treacherous act, John Alexander rose in federal parliament to condemn Azerbaijan's glorification of axe murderer turned national hero Ramil Safarov, who murdered Armenian servicemen during a NATO peace program in Hungary. Member for Prospect Dr. Hugh McDermott followed and stood in the New South Wales Parliament's Legislative Assembly to condemn Azerbaijan's continued celebration of Safarov and called on the international community to resist the dictatorship's demand to bring the Republic of Artsakh under its control. That's not where the action ends though. During the Senate estimates questioning at the end of October, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade admitted that Artsakh is a party to the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, which has been never mentioned before. These are all true #moving mountains moments.
Yeah, but is it a party to the conflict for the purposes of when we say all parties should be gathering around to resolve the conflict? Do we consider these people to be a party for that purpose?
Yes, Senator.
Right, thank you very much.
When I asked Haig how ANC chooses its battles, he said it's about our community. and what they prioritise for us. Our community prioritises Artsakh, so ANC spends time on that. Our community also prioritises justice and recognition of the Armenian genocide, so ANC spends time on that as well. And finally, our community prioritises Armenia, so ANC spends time to make the Republic more sustainable, boosted by the recent People's Democratic Revolution. This was the first time a delegation led by federal Australian politicians travelled to Armenia, and it looked unforgettable. Not only was there a cultural exchange between the Armenian and Australian politicians, but there were exciting prospects of future alliances between the two countries. For instance, during a meeting between Armenia's Deputy Minister of Economy, Mr. Areg Grigorian, and Mr. Tim Wilson MP, there began discussions on a potential double tax treaty between Australia and Armenia. On the other hand, Mr. John Alexander MP had discussed steps to bring Armenia's Chess in Schools initiative to Australia, in a meeting with Armenia's Deputy Minister of Education, Ms. Areg Grigorian. Mr. Trent Zimmerman MP, who is the chair of Australia's Parliament House of Representatives Standing Committee on Health, Ageing and Sport, met with Armenia's Deputy Minister for Health, Ms. Anahid Avanesyan. They talked about key health agendas on the table for both countries, with Mr. Zimmerman offering to continue dialogue to assist Armenia in implementing policies Australia had had experience with practicing over many years. His significant experience fighting corruption with the Ministry for Justice and a leader of the Judicial Court. Armenia and Australia are better connected than ever today because of this delegation to Armenia. Of course, the community lists itself a priority for ANC-AU, who they rely on to inform them of what's going on in public affairs. Sometimes it's hard to tell which Member of Parliament agrees with our issues and which ones don't. That's why I think ANC-AU's report card is a great and digestible way to understand who supports what. They released one as a community guide as part of the New South Wales state election and one for the federal election. I can't vote yet, but when I can, I'll know where to look for guidance. There's also no limit to how much outreach they do for the community. For instance, they held lectures, they run workshops at Galston College and for the Armenian Youth Federation. They hold community town halls in Melbourne, Sydney, Perth, Adelaide and Canberra, with a local branch this year organised the first ever Armenian Genocide commemoration event in our nation's capital. Of course, youth advocacy is something I also can't wait to be a part of. So ANC is a community. ANC is what our community values. Our community values a democratic and prosperous Armenia, a safe, secure and Armenian Artsakh, and justice for the Armenian cause, with a sustainable and reliable Armenian-Australian community with its schools, centres, churches and organisations. This is ANC. Now, do you understand why I like coming into the office? I also like Antor's Pizza and the Cheesecake Shop, but don't tell anyone about that. But seriously, if all of this happened in less than a year, can you imagine what the next few will hold? ANC, #Moving Mountains.
Hey!